Well, there's a report out today about some discrepancies in the reported numbers that are being put out by the United States government regarding the Wu flu. Of course, I and many others have been discussing and repeatedly made reference to the problems, to say the least, with the reported numbers coming out of China and how they couldn't be trusted, but that other, Western countries, once the virus made its way there, we could get a little more realistic understanding of how much damage it will do. And of course, that's why, countries such as Italy, I believe Spain, and the United States have all surpassed China in terms of their number of infected and their number of dead, despite the fact that all these countries are significantly smaller in terms of population than China. But something I've talked less about, but still made reference to, at least in recent weeks, are the problems inherent in the U.S. data. Now, from the beginning, the U.S. was not doing nearly enough testing, and they still, to this day, are not doing nearly enough testing. The U.S. understands that they don't have enough tests to test all the people who, probably have caught this, and so they're only testing people really who are symptomatic, and they keep, running this home that, hey, if you're not symptomatic, you don't need a test. And I've gone over why this is so bad, because if you're not testing, asymptomatic people and getting them off the streets and getting them to stay in their homes, then you're not going to stop the spread of this. Now, instead of trying to test just all the people who might have caught this, find all the asymptomatic people and have them go home and quarantine, the option has been taken to pretty much just quarantine everyone in the whole country and tell everyone to stay away from each other. And so that means that we have lots and lots of actual cases that are never going to be confirmed. Our confirmed cases are really only the symptomatic cases. Those are the people who are getting tests, if they can get a test at all. Some people are symptomatic and can't get a test because there's just not enough tests to go around. And as a result, people are dying across the country without ever having been tested. And once they're dead, there's very little motivation, or there's very little sense of urgency when it comes to testing them, because, hey, there's nothing we can do for them now. We're much better off using the tests we have on living people to try and figure out if this is what they have so we can save them before they die. And so people, like I said, are dying, have been dying, especially before testing was as widespread as it is now. Even the limited amount of testing we have now is much more prevalent than it had been, a month ago or so. And so this discrepancy in the death rate, trying, to estimate how many people around the country are dying without ever having been tested, how many people have already died without ever being tested, was, studied by a couple of reporters from the New York Times. And, the New York Times, deserves a lot of the crap that they get for being very biased and elitist. But the fact of the matter remains that the New York Times has more resources to investigate things if they want to than just about any other, newspaper or media organization. They do, when they want to actually find facts about something, they can do it. When they're not using their paper just to spout propaganda, they can do some decent work. And I think that this story that they put out this Sunday is an example of that, because they have, gone around trying to, track down this whole story of, people who were not able to get tested and ended up dying, and how these people, the folks who are burying them, that their loved ones, they all know they had it, but it doesn't say that they had it on their death certificate, and so they're not being put into the official count. Everyone pretty much around this person knows, their doctor, their family, the coroner, the funeral home, they're all treating the body as if it's infected, but it's not going to say that on their death certificate. And so now this is the part that is something that I'm not qualified to judge up or down whether this is an accurate claim, but they claim that the real number of people dead in America is not 9,400 as the government's reporting it. That is just the number of confirmed cases. In reality, they think that it's probably around double that, of around 20,000 cases total. And so that makes a pretty big difference. Now, of course, you can look at that and say, wow, that would, double the death rate. But in reality, it actually wouldn't double the death rate, because there's so many people around the country who have not been tested that didn't die, that would probably well outnumber those people, almost certainly. So I would say that if anything, if we tested everyone in the country to find every last person who really did have this, including people who are already dead, the death rate would probably be lower than it is right now. because the death rate you're seeing in the United States, even though it's not complete, because the epidemic is still ongoing, so the death rate is not accurate. It's not a true case fatality rate, I believe, is the term they use in epidemiology. Even still, that number would be lower if we tested everyone. With that said, though, if you're not just looking at the death rate, if you're looking at the totals, it is absolutely fair to point out that there's a lot more people dying of this than we actually know. And how many people actually did die of this, we probably will never know. People don't know exactly how many people died in various wars. I mean, the war in Iraq, which is a pretty recent one, it was highly televised. There were reporters everywhere. The estimates of how many people died in that war range from 500,000 to 1 million. That's a pretty massive margin there. So, in other news out of the U.S., New York reported less deaths today, I guess, than they have been over the last few days, which, it's just one day, so we don't know necessarily if that means that they're tapering off, or if this, it's just a matter of RNG, the random number generator. If, I don't know necessarily. So we'll see in the next few days whether things are slowing down in New York. It'd be nice if it did, because, as I've been going on about our society cannot survive an economic shutdown like this for much longer. And I don't really want to make this a video about the economy, but there is still that risk that, let's say we're able to get the epidemic under control, and I say epidemic referring specifically to this outbreak within the U.S., not the global pandemic. If we get this under control and the U.S. is able to start opening up its economy again, when you've got all those asymptomatic carriers out there, well, what happens when all those asymptomatic people go back to work and everybody starts spreading it again? We're going to have the epidemic start right back up, or at least that's the fear. So we can't get too optimistic economically just because the rate of infection or the rate of death is slowing down in the U.S. and in places like to get to Europe. Italy and France are having promising numbers recently. Things seem to be slowing down there. But of course, both of those countries are on maximum lockdown, much tighter than the U.S., and they have been for some time now, completely grinding their economies to a halt. And when you take such an extreme measure and just try to do that shock therapy to where you stop the spread of it very quickly, I think that they run the same risk that I was just talking about, and even greater risks in the U.S. of letting this, break out again and start a second wave. Sort of a man-made second wave. It's not sort of an environmental second wave. It's a second wave generated by, the re-socialization of humanity. So while these numbers are encouraging, it's not clear that it is going to lead to any relief for our economy in the near future. All it signals is a relief, for the people who actually have this and are dying. If there's less people dying, then it's a little less scary of a situation. But if either way, if you don't have the virus, and all that's changing is lowering of the death rate, but your economy's still locked down, that's not doing too much to help you personally. So the last big update for today that I saw is that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who did test positive for the virus recently, has been hospitalized because apparently he's not doing too well. He's come down quite ill. Now, I haven't heard anything about him being on death's doorstep. Who knows? Maybe he is. But I certainly wish him no ill will. I think that there have been a lot worse people in charge of the UK. And so I wouldn't like to see him go too quick because, frankly, whoever's going to replace him would probably be much worse. By the way, you know what? I lied. I buried the lead on this video because there's a leak now out that Johnson & Johnson has a vaccine. Now, there was a story not too long ago that Johnson & Johnson was working with the U.S. to try and get a vaccine approved very quickly and that they had vaccine candidates. But the leak is that this pretty much looks like a sure thing now and that we've got 3 to 4 weeks before it's going to be unveiled. And so there is an economist on Twitter by the name of Harold Malmgren, I believe is how you say his name, and I've always found him to be an interesting fellow. He's not exactly someone who agrees with me on all sorts of things, and I should say I don't agree with him on everything, but he's an interesting person to follow, and he has lots of connections to lots of people because he's been around a long time. And apparently he has some connection to Johnson & Johnson, and that's just what they told him. So it is a rumor of one, but again, it is consistent with the actual news we've been hearing about 6 days ago regarding a vaccine that Johnson & Johnson, were working on. And of course, 3 to 4 weeks, even though that is pretty quick by vaccine standards, and assuming that the vaccine works, that's still a very long time from now. A lot of bad things are going to happen between now and then, not just in terms of people dying of the virus, but economically. I mean, how do we go 3 to 4 weeks again with no economy? And as I was alluding to in a video before that I did discussing why this whole situation was very dangerous, because it's going to probably lead to the point to where vaccinations become mandatory, and that sets a very bad precedent and will cause, I think, social unrest when it comes to the anti-vaxxers, who are a very dedicated group of people who are going to be, I think, very suspicious that a vaccine was developed this quick for a brand new, novel virus. So we'll have to wait and see if this news is actually true. If indeed it is, I will have a lot more to say on that at the time. So if you've gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.